In this episode, we are joined by the master of horror himself, Matt Egar, as he guides us through creating a horror campaign. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 68. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I'm your host Inwils and welcome to April. Now, I was going to try and make an April's Fool's joke at the beginning of this episode, but I suddenly realised that it might just be a thing in the UK. I'm not too sure that April Fool's Day is a worldwide phenomenon. Anyway, if you're not familiar with April Fools, what we do on the 1st of April is that we try to prank our friends and colleagues and family members and have a laugh at their expense. Yes, it does sound really cruel. There's usually some excellent April Fool's jokes on the social media, so they always add to the joy of the day. And many of us try to decide whether or not what is real and what is actually a prank. Anyway, the other reason I decided not to do an April Fool's joke is that according to the rules, if you prank somebody after midday, instead of them being the recipients of the prank, the joke is on you. And because many of you listen to this after midday, I would end up being the fool rather than you. Nothing new there, you might say. Recently, I've been receiving some very positive comments about the podcast, so thank you to everybody who has reached out to express their appreciation. It is fantastic for me to belong to such an excellent community, and I really do appreciate all your support. So you might say that I'm completely mad to do this, but I've actually started to create a new campaign setting, as well as the two fantasy ones I have, one for Mythras Fantasy and one for Classic Fantasy, and M space for a science fiction campaign and Destined for superheroes. I wanted to create a horror campaign so I could start to scare my players. I know there are plenty out there like Call of Cthulhu and Casting the Runes, but I am just keen to create a modern day horror campaign using the After the Vampire Wars supplements. So I thought I would call upon Matt, the master of horror himself, to guide us all through creating a scary horror campaign.
Sure. Hi, I'm Matt E. of Old Bones Publishing, and currently I'm working on Mythras stuff. I'm looking at producing my own rule set, which will be, well, we won't talk about that. We'll stick to Mythras right now. But
yeah. Nice. Lots of things in the pipeline then.
Yes, too many things in the pipeline, not enough hours, too many projects.
It's always the case. That's always the case. So you're my go-to horror expert, just so you know. So whenever I want to talk about horror and gaming, you're at the top of my list. So what attracts you to that genre, that horror genre?
I don't know. I guess it's my personality. I have a dark personality. I don't know. It just, something about it appeals to me more than, there's a lot of bright, shining high fantasy type stuff out there already. I gravitate towards the darker parts of fiction. I think because I feel like somehow they reveal more maybe about
Oh,
the characters.
mm,
I mean, if that's why we play these games, you know, well, not just to have fun, but to like learn stuff about characters, right?
yeah.
That we're inhabiting temporarily and maybe learn something about ourselves or other people as we do it, human nature. I think that horror is attractive because that is something that's especially interesting to probe when you're in a safe space and you're only playing
Yeah.
a game, you know?
That's it. I in the MMOs I play, I love playing things like necromancers and vampires and really dark. And somebody in the stream once said, it's as if all my goodness happens in real life. So I turn to the dark side once I start to play games and things like that. So, which...
Well, if you had to choose, I think that's the way you would choose.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I said. You know, that's a good way round it. So, yes, I am starting or want to start my own modern horror campaign. And I know you're an expert, so I'm hoping that you can give me some tips and advice which could resonate with anybody else who's thinking about making up a similar campaign. So, yeah, where should I start?
Well, all right. So there's this classic piece of literature called Supernatural Horror in Literature by H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, yeah.
It's a scholarly article that he wrote to basically, I guess, to familiarize himself and to study all of the stuff that was like to date when he was writing it. I guess
Yeah.
it was from about 1920 or something, 1919 maybe. And it's generally hailed as a pretty good piece of scholarship, but it's got this classic opening line. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown.
Nice. Like
So
it.
you can kind of see where this is where he's coming from as an author of weird fiction, right?
Yeah.
So now you've said right away that it's modern horror.
Yes.
So I think that maybe you have a slightly taller order. If we were talking about like an ancient world game, people, you know, still maybe the gods were real and maybe things that we would call superstitions seemed very real to people back then, right? So I think it's a kind of an easier sell that the unknown would be just around the corner in a game like that. So I think that one of the first challenges that you have as the author of a game is going to be, you know, in what way is there unknown? The modern world, you know, we have the internet.
Yes.
We have a 24-hour news cycle and TikTok and stuff like that. So the idea that there's stuff that's undiscovered, it can still work. It's fine. But you have to think rather carefully about how it's going to interface with a world that the players are already rather familiar with, or at least they believe they're rather familiar with. So what are the twists that you want to put in your world? What do you have in mind?
Yeah. So I'm going to instantly show my age and the fact that I live in the UK, because ages ago there was a wonderful TV series called Sapphire and Steel, and Dave McCallum, I think it was, and Joanna Lumley. And they went off to strange occurrences. And that was mainly to do with time and spirits and ghosts and the unknown in that sense. And I think what I want in the campaign, I want the unexplained. I think that's what I really want to match the players up to, putting them in situations where it doesn't matter how much tech or understanding you have, there might be something that's unexplained. And then that could be linked to a whole load of weird creatures or weird spirits, or even humans, doing weird things. So I think rather than the unknown, I think I want to focus on the unexplained, and sort of like think, okay, what could be happening? And Sapphire and Steel always went to a location. It might be a house or a village where there was something happening that you couldn't explain it, and it went from anything from weird nursery rhymes being sang by, apparitions in a bedroom, to somebody stealing faces in pictures. There was an entity in there. I do love the idea of sanity or tenacity. Okay. I really like that aspect. And, the fact that to me, being modern and having horror is probably adds more tension, because you've got all this tech, all this understanding, and yet there's something quite unexplained before you.
That's an interesting point. If you think about people in an ancient kind of world, because the supernatural kind of is right there all the time, they might actually be a little bit more used to the idea and inured by it. So if, they turned the corner and there was a ghost there of someone that they knew to be dead for 100 years or whatever, they might be like, okay, it's his ghost. What do you do with a ghost? You run away, or you talk to it? Or it might be more matter of fact in that sense of them. It really might be more shocking to someone in a modern world.
Yes.
So that's fine. I think that has a lot of potential. That's good. So it sounds to me like it's kind of an X-Files vibe.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, very much so.
There's also, there was a show on about 25 years ago, I guess, here in America called Millennium with Lance Henriksen. You might want to watch a couple episodes of that.
Oh, yes.
Some of that was rather dark, and it touched on, mystical themes. Like, he was beginning to discover that some of the stuff that was going on was not scientific stuff. And I think that got him.
Yeah. Nice.
So I was going to say, I was a little bit surprised that you wanted to, talk to me about horror stuff, because my first reaction was, well, you've played plenty of Call of Cthulhu, right? Certainly you understand what's going on with the horror vibe, right?
Yes, and I have. And one of the other reason it's in the modern day is because I'm not very good at history at all. And so I think, Call of Cthulhu is, I think, originally set in the 1920s.
Right.
Casting Runes, I think, is set somewhere in the past. I can't remember where.
It's in the teens. I think it's in Edwardian or Georgian time.
Yeah. And I did the Call of Cthulhu campaign that I started was in Victorian Britain. Okay. In London, so you had things like Jack the Ripper and that, and the smog and things like that. So I'm not very good at history. So if somebody said to me, what kind of bikes were around in the 1920s, I would have no idea. But if somebody says what kind of bikes are out in the modern day, then I know. Right. So I was hoping that I wouldn't have to invest a huge amount of time going back in time and learning about history. I forgot what the question was now, because I've just waffled on.
No, that's fine. That's actually a really smart idea, is anything you can do to lower the barrier to creating your game world so that maybe you don't have to do a ton of research or keep a giant notebook
Yes.
full of stuff. You can just come up with it. It's no problem. That's good. That will help when you're actually playing. I'm very much in favor of that. I'm not much of a historian myself either, so I try to avoid historical fiction type things.
Yeah, especially if you've got players who know more about that era than you do, which that's another reason I like to avoid it. But I have to say, I'm going to base it in the UK, and I think there's some wonderful opportunities because, you know, we have things like Stonehenge, which is quite, we don't know 100% what Stonehenge is all about. You know, there's various rumors, but there's also things like the Loch Ness Monster, you know, and these legends and myths abound. And I think it's because there's still places in the UK that are not high-tech skyscrapers, you know, they're little villages and they're quite remote. So
this is interesting. So we have an X-Files vibe as your baseline, but it sounds to me like you're also going to be able to tap into what's sometimes called folk horror.
Right, yes.
Right. Very good. There are a number of folk horror games or settings out there these days. I guess it's more quintessentially American, of course, but I guess I'm thinking of Old Gods of Appalachia.
Yes.
That's one game. And I was just reading a setting book for I think it was meant for Twilight 2000 by Free League, but it was a setting in an English village.
Yes.
Not too long ago. I can't remember the name of it. I could probably find it if I look through my downloads folder. But that one seemed to be rather interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Folk horror can do.
Yeah. I've got a question. Do you think like Call of Cthulhu has that mythos that is all the monsters, etc. Do you think that I should create something like that? You know, something that joins everything together, or do you think it's quite all right to sort of like just do individual scenarios where their only link might be the players, if that makes sense?
Right. All right. So let's ask a slightly different question.
Okay, go for it.
Is this going to be a finite campaign or is it going to be open-ended?
Open-ended as in
you don't have you're like, I figure this will last 6 or 8 scenarios, and then there will be a conclusion, and then it will be over. Like a campaign with a beginning, middle, and end. But an open-ended campaign might not have an end, literally.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really interesting question because, so as you know, the group that I play in, we play a lot of games, and a lot of campaigns, should I say, every time I do a one-off campaign or adventure just for a change, they always want to come back to it again. So, you know, classic fantasy in the imperative version was just meant to be a one-off as classic fantasy imperative came out. But as soon as we played it, the members of the group said, oh no, we want to come back to this. The same with M Space and Destin. Destin was just going to be a one-off, but now it's back in the rotation. So initially it's just going to be a one-off, but I always create my campaigns as if they're going to go on forever, because I like that character progression. That's what I like to see. I like the players getting involved. So I would say it's going to be open-ended.
Okay. In that case, I think that you need to have you need to answer a series of questions about what the ground truths are,
Right.
whether or not the characters ever discover them.
Yeah.
So, if we want to keep going back there, in Call of Cthulhu, there is the ground truth is that we only know a teeny tiny bit about what's real in the world, and the more you discover, the worse it is for you. But
Yes.
what choice do you have, right? So the ground truths are they're the great old ones, and there are these powers, and there are these evil books that you can discover to learn more, and there are these various factions like the Mi-Go are also around, and
Yeah.
the great race of Yith or whatever, they've been to Earth too. So there are all these different aspects that you could discover by accident. It's if you don't want to have an end, that's fine. I think you should develop like at least that bullet list of what is true and
Right.
can be discovered.
Yeah.
Even if the players never discover it or never come to realize, I think that so if you want to run a cosmic horror, a weird tales kind of horror game, I think that one of the chief horror aspects is the revelation that slowly emerges that there is so much more out there, and that we humans are kind of insignificant, actually.
Yes. Yeah. I like that. I like that feel that, as the campaign progresses, the players or the characters get to know more and more and more, and almost like they join up the dots and suddenly realize that there's something much bigger going on in the background that normal, mundane people know nothing about. And I would that's a good. I would love that feeling to come from the players that they just are thinking, so they might never voice it, but they're saying as if I wish we never knew this. I love that feel, that without all that knowledge, the world's a much safer place. But when you start to unpick it, it can be quite scary.
Right. You can tie this gaining of forbidden knowledge theme. And so that's something else we should talk about, the actual themes that you have in mind. You can tie this theme of the gaining of forbidden knowledge to lots of other things too. Like if these characters were like kids leaving childhood behind. I mean, Stephen King has tapped into that rather successfully a couple times, I guess. Or like, teenagers becoming adults, or this idea of revelation can be tied to other aspects of human experience, and to the degree that you want to do that, that's another way of tying it directly to character development.
Yeah.
As these people go along, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be like that, but if you wanted to go in that direction, that's a decision to make early, because it will shape the kind of adventures that you give them, and the likely outcomes that they will not the plot outcomes, but the character outcomes, the takeaways that they're going to get from playing this game for a while.
Yeah.
So do you have big themes in mind?
Define themes for me.
You've named one. In other words, the baseline ideas that you would like to have influence the story. It's like a refrain in a song. The themes are the things that come up over and over again that you repeat, maybe not always in the same words, or maybe not always with the exact same notes, but they're the motifs that keep coming up over and over again.
Right.
Okay.
I really, I think the first theme that I want goes back to this idea of the unexplained. And I want this theme that there is a whole load of things going on,
right,
that initially people can't explain or understand or choose not to understand. And I want the players probably to start off thinking, maybe quite naively saying, oh, there's not ghosts, or this isn't a strange spirit. It's something, like something quite normal and mundane happening. But as they get more and more, they start to unpick or investigate these unexplained and start to join the dots together. Okay. So I definitely want that theme to run through it. I also do want the theme that if you know too much, it's really bad. So it's
why is it really bad? Is it bad because of the inevitable psychological trauma that it causes you, or is it bad because when you look into the abyss also looks into you? Maybe you get discovered by things that you wish didn't even know you existed.
I really like the second concept. I really like that, looking into the abyss and the abyss looking back, but deeper. Initially, my feeling is just that the more you understand it, it just drives you to a state of insanity. I feel a lot of fantasy campaigns or any genre, you naturally want more and more and more, and you get more powerful, you get more weapons or spells, or you get beefier. But one of the aspects that I really like about horror is when you don't want to know that much, because if you do, something quite negative can happen. And it's a bit like, okay, you discover a book, an ancient occult book, that might have the answer to every unexplained event in the whole of history. All the answers could be there. But this feeling that if you read that book, our humans' brains cannot comprehend it. That's and right. you will go insane just because of how it's described and what's out there. And I almost see that as a limiting factor in the campaign, that anybody who has found out what's actually happening is now insane.
Right. This is the genius of Call of Cthulhu and the space that it has carved out in RPGs, is that characters, even as they progress and become, better, in the usual ways that we expect, they also become more fragile as they go along, and the stakes become higher and higher. And as it turns out, the only thing worse than, wondering about the answers to the questions you have is maybe getting those answers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay.
The other thing that I do like, and I've based my new campaign on After the Vampire Wars, because I really like this idea of a parallel world, and things like vampires and werewolves and the fae and seers and things like that. I really like that aspect, and I think that goes really well. It works in parallel to all the tech, etc. You know, in the sense that, you know, there's vampires out there that are real. Right. You know, that could be, you know, causing things, or might be just a wandering spirit or something like that. So I do want that. Right. That idea of another world, a parallel universe, or something like that. Yeah,
that's that may not exactly be a theme, but that is definitely a world feature. That is all right. Now you've named one of your ground truths. There is another world right smacked up against ours that most people don't even know about, and it's around you all the time. Okay, that's good. It's interesting when you first said, "Oh, I'm planning to use after the Vampire Wars." The first thing that popped into my mind really was like World of Darkness type stuff, because I think that's the way in which many people imagine using that. You know, I can use Mythras to play World of Darkness type games or whatever.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, I'm guessing that the characters are going to be humans who they're not going to be the vampires and the werewolves mostly.
Yeah. So my campaign is called The Gifted, because how I see it is and I haven't got this far down in my thinking, that there's an organization or a group of people who are slightly different. And this comes from Sapphire and Steel. So Sapphire and Steel were both human, but they had special gifts, you know, and Steel could survive in sub-zero temperatures, and Sapphire had telepathy and precognition and things like that. So the characters are going to have some aspect, you know, that they come together. So one of them might be able to touch things and get a glimpse of the past, or what's happened to it, or something like that. And somebody else might be able to, there might be basically like an empath, and there might be empathic and, you know, sense things. So, and so they will be human.
Right. They're humans, but they have access to magic or powers of some kind.
Yeah. But they're not vampires or werewolves. They're just quite, if you saw them out and about, they look completely and utterly normal.
And more importantly, I guess they think and feel the same way that you and I would.
Yes, 100%. And it's almost like you can imagine that as they were growing up, they probably got a lot of hassle because of their gifts. But now they've joined this organization or whatever, or come together in a group. They now have a purpose. They now understand why they have these gifts. And I think you got me thinking earlier on, this almost like leads me down the path of something needs to be defeated. You know, it's a bit like, I don't watch a lot of horror because it scares me, but Nightmare on Elm Street, there was one of them that they had dream warriors, and so the kids could go into the dream and actually fight Freddy with their gifts. And just when you were talking beforehand, I almost like feel maybe that's the reason they got their gifts, almost like to strike a balance, you know, between the darkness and the light, or the mundane. Yeah.
So, well, that leads to a whole bunch of other metaphysical questions, like, who is who is who is dedicated to creating this balance, and I don't know, that could lead you down all sorts of roads, like Michael Moorcock, law versus
Oh,
chaos and
yes.
stuff. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'll leave that to be for the moment. But so that is all right. Lots of things in my head. Hang on. So the fact that these individuals, are a little bit special, they have an asterisk attached to them, magic powers, whatever you want to call it. I think that you could tie this this idea of self-discovery. Okay. The farther along in this game of yours they go, the more their characters develop, the more they learn about this weird world that they find themselves living in. Now all of a sudden we've tied this perilous knowledge to maybe the quest to understand themselves that they've always had
Yes.
since they were kids, and they didn't even realize it necessarily.
100%. Yeah.
So that I think is an opportunity to add an extra wrinkle, something that is not provided in a game like Call of Cthulhu, for example, is that not only are the big questions about the world and why we're in it dangerous, but maybe even that knowledge that you've always wanted to understand who you are, your own self, your human experience, maybe even that is too dangerous. But how can you not go for it?
Exactly. 100%.
So there's a hook. There's a hook for you. There's a theme. Okay. So going back to the idea of, is this finite or open-ended? We already said it's open-ended. Once you start talking about a big bad evil guy, if you identify one such person, that changes things significantly, because it kind of automatically points you down the road of, it would be easier to do a finite campaign, because the climax of this campaign, think of it like a season of TV episodes, eventually they're going to have the big confrontation with the big bad evil guy, and because it's a role-playing game and we roll dice, maybe they won't actually defeat it.
Yeah. Exactly.
When it's open-ended, you might want to resist doing that. You might want to have a bunch of big bad evil guys out there, or the sense that there's a big bad evil guy, but you can't tell who they are necessarily. You only ever get to deal with their minions.
Yeah. I like the idea of a parallel world, and maybe that is the evil. So rather than being a person or an entity, it's almost like there's this parallel world, and where it touches our world, that's where the issues occur, and which then, this got me thinking just while you were talking, if I go that route, I'm going to have to find a way to close those links. And I don't want that. I don't want casting spells and, closing links. Right.
And it turns the characters into chambermaids. They're just walk around cleaning up messes constantly, or whack-a-mole or something, right?
I think that's, I do like the idea of an ultimate dark entity, but I wouldn't be able to bring myself about killing it, because, and I think this is a very philosophical point for me.
Right.
There's always evil in the world, that there's always going to be that.
You just named another theme.
Cool.
There's always evil in the world. That's a theme.
Yeah.
That's a ground truth for your world. Okay. That's fine. Does that mean there's always good in the world?
Yes. They're,
Okay.
and I think the players are almost that good,
Okay.
you know, because they're opposing that evil. And I hope, although I can't predict it, that they will have those values as well.
Okay.
You know, that they're not going to be walking around with rocket launchers blowing things up.
Right, because it's easier. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so and if anything, we're not having guns in any case, because the UK doesn't. You can have a license for guns, but generally, people don't carry guns. You know, so
Okay.
yeah.
So that's essentially another theme, is that you're going to have to find another way to resolve this issue. It's not going to be some kind of A-team shoot 'em up, which is
Yeah.
actually a little important too, because it goes back to the vibe that you want for this game. So like, when you tell me that you're going to use After the Vampire Wars to run a Mythras-based game of this type,
Yeah.
and you know, we keep using the word vampire, vampire, vampire. Okay, so one of the things that I have always thought would be an excellent use for After the Vampire Wars actually maybe has been slightly bumped out now by the subsequent publication of Destined, is, wouldn't After the Vampire Wars be a really good way to run Blade
Yes.
in Mythras, right?
100%. Yeah.
Right. But now that's a funny thing, actually. Is Blade horror or is it action genre?
Okay, so for me, that's really easy. It's action.
Yes, I agree.
It's purely action, and the vampires in there, although they are bad, I don't see them as evil. And I think I might have to clarify myself on this, in the sense that if they were truly evil, then they would do more than what they do in the vampire, in Blade. You know, I think they're quite subservient in Blade. You know, they keep themselves to themselves, and it's, you know, but I think vampires should be so powerful that they can just invade. You know, they can invade and demolish the human race, or just puts it into servitude. You know,
Right. That's an excellent question. Why haven't they done this? Because
yes,
they should, right.
Yeah, and that's why I put it in. There's not that awful feeling that almost like, oh my, I've seen a vampire. You know, it's quite, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one.
That's
oh,
right.
there's
Where's
a few over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there might be vampires in the campaign, and they could be good or they could be evil. You know, that's the second thing. But I think there's something worse than a vampire.
Okay. So that's another question that you have to answer for your ground truth, tied sort of to the big bad evil guy ideas. What is worse than a vampire? Okay. There's another question for you to answer. What is that thing? So now you've mentioned there is always good in the world. There's always evil in the world. We hope the player characters are going to be on the good side.
Yeah.
What about the gray in between? That might actually prove to be very interesting. There might be NPCs littering the landscape that the characters end up dealing with. We all know how NPCs take on a life of their own, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they will seem to be one way sometimes, and then in other contexts, as the story develops, they might be seen in a different light. That might be one of the things that you want to emphasize as a theme of the campaign might be there's a lot of gray.
Yes. I think,
fun.
yeah, I think there's a really nice idea there, because we've got sort of like the ultra evil, and I see the players as the good. And I think whether or not something is good or evil for NPCs comes down to how they go about something. Okay. It's their actions, okay. And that's what I want to.
That's an actual philosophical stance you're taking there.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Is the nature of goodness or evil? This is soteriology, the study of evil, right?
Yeah.
Is this actually an inherent property of people and things, or is it all defined by your actions? So, okay, go on. Think about that.
That's just, I was streaming the other day and we were talking, this is the state of my streams. We were talking about truth. Mm-hmm. And is there a difference between truth and reality? And one of the interesting dilemmas that we came up with or were asking about is, if there was no humans on the planet, would there be truth? And yes. It's this, and it's this idea, it's a bit like gravity. And gravity, I would think, is a truth. There is this force called gravity. And if all the humans left the world,
there would still be gravity.
Right. Yeah, but we wouldn't.
Because you believe in objective reality.
Yeah, but we wouldn't, nobody would call it gravity, mm-hmm. because we've discovered a concept and labeled it. But nobody, the birds in the air would not be flying around thinking, oh, aren't I good? I can withstand the force of gravity. Right. It almost like pale into insignificance. It will not be there anymore. And I really want this feeling that some people just don't want to look at it. It's easier to look away than to actually find out what's this. Yeah.
Right. So this goes back to that, that theme of ours there. It's like, the truth is awful, but how can you not look? Right.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very much so. Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah. All right. So, you talked a little bit. So let's talk about just nuts and bolts kind of considerations here. We've decided that this isn't going to be a historical type game, so you don't have to do a bunch of history research. That's good. That lowers the bar for you. You've decided you're going to use After the Vampire Wars, so you have your rule set all set up for you. That's good. Are there specific things that so After the Vampire Wars is a bunch of rules, and it's a kind of a setting book also. I think that you have most of your setting probably worked out fairly well, so you're not going to have to actually abide by a number of the things in After the Vampire Wars, like their fake history, right?
No, correct. And I don't think their history will be our history.
Right. Okay.
That's what I'll play on. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
The other thing that I'm going to do, by the way, is pre-generate the characters.
Okay.
Are
your players okay with that?
Yeah, they'll be okay with what I say. I tell you why. Yeah, I had to think about this for a long period of time.
Okay.
Because when you're creating a character for a campaign, you need to know things, mm-hmm. Because in knowing, you develop your character, or you think this would be a good skill or this would be a good skill. And I didn't want to go down that road with the players.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want them to pick skills that were never going to be used.
Okay.
And the other thing that I'm doing, this sounds really strange, but I've got it in my head. And so I'm not going to use guns. Okay. Well, I'm not going to use guns, but I'll use guns as to demonstrate the principle.
Okay, fine.
So what normally happens, I think, in a campaign, you get a group of people together and they each have their individual skills. But I want them to all have the same skills, but with subtle changes. So if I give you the example that they can all fire a pistol, let's just say that. They can all fire a pistol. However, let's say a gun, that's better. They can all fire a gun. But some of them might be really specialized in shotguns. So they're very close quarter sort of like character. Somebody might have a sniper rifle or, those long arm rifles. So they're better at distances. And somebody else might just have handguns, but be able to fire them two at the same time. So right. I actually want them all to have the same skills, but be subtly different. Okay. So drive would be another really interesting skill. So they can all drive, but they all drive different things, from motorbikes to vans and articulated lorries. Because right. I don't like, like the holy trinity of MMOs when you have a tank, a healer, and DPS. Sometimes I think characters can find that they have little to do in a situation because they've done their research earlier on, and they sort of like they spent the night in the library finding out the information, and then they cowered at the back, when they're going guns drawn.
Right. I have to say, I understand that that might not be, fun or whatever. It's always good for every character to have something to do.
Yes.
And so that they shouldn't feel left out, like they have nothing to contribute. But I will say that I think that often comes down to the imagination of the players and of the GM. Sometimes the people who are no good at fighting maybe should start fighting anyway because they have no choice or whatever, and they may not be comfortable with that, but it's something to do. Sometimes the characters who may not know anything about this technology or how to drive or how to shoot or how to do this or that, maybe they will need to anyway. So I think the key is so I think in terms of spotlight moments nowadays, right? It's important to share the spotlight, and that will help each player feel engaged. And not everybody has to be in the spotlight all the time, but everyone should get some time or whatever. And it should be fairly obvious if everyone's in the right rhythm. It should be fairly obvious. This is the part where we need to go to the library. So-and-so is our go-to person here. But it may be also that one of their friends accidentally discovers something rather interesting that turns out to be pivotal later. That's all fine. According to what I was just saying a minute ago, one of those times where someone who is completely unprepared and yet is thrust into the situation and kind of has to deal with it, that's a spotlight moment too.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Of a different type. So if players are prepared to think of it in that way, this is their special moment, even though they wouldn't have predicted it. then I think that's a way to avoid boredom or
Yeah, valid point.
worrying
Yeah.
worrying about alienating your players. So there are ways around this. I wouldn't sweat it too much. It is good to have identifiable niches for characters, but like I said, I think it can be even more interesting when people sort of are induced, not forced, but they get the idea that they ought to step outside of their comfort
Yes.
zone because it would be better for the party, or there's some great necessity or whatever. This is part of the difference between, like, role playing and role playing, where you're rolling
Yes.
the dice.
Dice. Yeah.
Obviously it doesn't make any sense for the magic user to do attacking. That's what the brick is for. But if the brick
Yeah.
is preoccupied,
Then they might have to. Yeah.
right, they may come down to that.
I'm just noticing the time. That is because I think we could probably talk for hours, but this needs to fit into the podcast. So I have some questions for you as the horror expert. I still think you're the horror expert.
Oh dear. Think that.
So I have a stumbling block about sanity at the moment, or tenacity, in the sense that I want it to be there, but I'm not too sure how to impact on that sanity. Whether or not it's, I can see it in the sense of, you've read this book, withstand that sanity loss because it's so dreadful. I can see it in that side, but I'm not too sure how to put it into the game when players encounter like entities, or they suddenly, should they lose sanity when they suddenly crack the investigation and suddenly find out what's doing it. Right. So what's your opinions about sanity and affecting it?
I basically translate the ideas from Call of Cthulhu to Mythras rules. I've done that in a number of my adventures. I can give you those rules if you want to use those. They're fairly simple. There are rules in the companion, the Mythras companion. They're more involved. They're more detailed. They may be more like what you're looking for, but basically, from a rules point of view, what I have done is I assign a potency score to the situation, to the
scene.
Yes,
yeah.
And then when it comes up in role playing, I have them roll willpower versus the potency in an opposed roll. And depending on how the opposed roll goes, if they win, they're okay, and if not, they lose tenacity points.
Yeah, because I feel that, say, for example, they go into a murder scene, in that level. I think if you don't ask for a sanity roll or willpower roll, they sort of like, players would just think it's like a normal scene. But I feel if I say, you need to make a tenacity check for this, it suddenly gives them that feeling of how bad it is without me having to get into graphic content description,
right.
So is that a better way around it?
So this goes to another one of the questions that I hadn't got to yet for you is, what do you want the overall flavor of this game to be like? Do you want it to be high adventure? Do you want it to be eerie? Do you want it to be terrifying? Do you want it? Yeah. What kind of chills are you after here?
So for me, in my head, there's almost like two opposed parts of the game. It's a bit like, so if they went onto a scene, there's the normal mundane things,
right?
And then there's this hidden nastiness and evil somewhere else. So if they went on a mission, and because there's been a number of deaths, say in a village, and there's no cause for them, they don't go in there thinking, oh, you know, it could just be a murderer, you know,
right.
or
a plague or something. Yeah.
Yeah. There's that normality. And
right.
then there's the evil. And when they see that nastiness, that's when they have to be. I go back to the idea that they're gaining knowledge from those scenes. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So if you want the game mechanics to be, you know, subtext for the actual, you know, drama, the play part, that's fine. Then I would say you should reserve any kind of tenacity check for one of those situations where their spider sense starts tingling, and that's the eerie stuff. You might not want to have it associated just with, you know, coming around the corner and there's a car wreck and there's a head lying in the road. That's terrible and maybe affecting, but it's mundane. You might want to reserve the tenacity stuff for real encounters with the other world.
Yes.
That's fine. That's a good way to do it. That's a decision you need to make in the beginning. Yeah.
And I also want to put it in if I see fitting things together done via insight checks, you know, when they suddenly realize connections. And I almost want it that if they're successful in an insight check, that can affect their sanity. You know, so, and that goes back to the feeling that I wanted, that you don't want to know more. You know, I think it's going to be a wonderful thing, a wonderful moment that I said, so, you know, you spend all day looking at this. Let's roll an insight check to see how much you've understood or accepted. And I really want the players to think, I do not want to make this roll.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, it'll get to the point where Inwils says, make an insight check, please, or please roll for me.
Yes. You know, and I actually want them to be saying something when I say, do you read the book? They say, well, I glance over it, you know, or something like that. So, you know, it's a sort of like, but at the same time, I want them to understand that they need that knowledge to find out why they are here, or maybe what's happening in the situation.
You notice in the table of contents that it says chapter 3, exactly the answers you need.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you turn to chapter 3?
Exactly. That's the sort of.
That's good. I like it.
Yeah. And in the sense that sometimes I think they might just not look at things. It's almost like saying, here is the answer to everything you've ever thought about, you know, that you wanted to know, and them to say, I'll leave that.
Yeah.
You know,
so you know what this is? Coming back round to horror, this is the monkey's paw.
Right.
You have the monkey's paw. It'll grant you wishes. Are you sure you want to use it?
Yeah, exactly. And this feeling that they actually don't want to, they probably do want to know more, but they're frightened about what they might find out.
Exactly. So this kind of feeling that the players will experience secondhand. This is what you're describing is what I would call a successful horror game. This feeling of uneasiness, of uncertainty, of dread. That's what you want your players to be able to experience. And that's because that really does reflect what they're what their characters are experiencing
Yes.
in their world. That's really good. I think you have a pretty firm grasp on what you want to do as far as that goes. This
We,
sounds like a good game, man.
yeah. Well, Sapphire and Steel has a lot to do with this, and but I really feel that I want a horror game because I love this sounds really strange, but I love creating adventures for horror. And it's just sort of like, it's almost like lets the deviousness of your imagination, come out. And I love the idea of folklore and legends or myths and things like that. So we've been talking for over an hour now, which is absolutely fantastic. But before I lose you as my horror expert, words of advice, please. Words of advice. What final words of advice would you give to me or to anyone who's making up a horror campaign?
So, if I may, it sounds like this will be investigative horror also.
Yes.
Okay, so you need to have a firm grasp on the rules that you're going to use for investigation. So I've talked a lot about that on and off on the Discord and maybe even here. I would become very familiar with the idea of using tasks for this.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to use the extended pool,
Okay.
From M Space.
Okay.
Because
You're going to do it that way. Conflict.
yeah, because I really like the idea of that gives me a time element as well. So that and that idea that I really like with the conflict pools saying, this is so it's got so many points to get rid of that you would have to look at it for years, to find the answer. And I really like the idea of, every experience roll check, somebody saying, oh, can I spend 3 weeks studying that book as well?
Yeah.
And so I'll definitely use the conflict pool system for that. Yeah.
Good. If since you're going to use conflict pools, you talked about, people, coming to certain revelations or whatever, and then you want them to make their insight check to see if they learn something terrible that affects them, right?
Yeah.
You may want to then set up your, how many points are in your conflict pool. Let's say there's 15 points in your conflict pool. Maybe at the 5-point mark, they have to roll an insight check or whatever. Or
yes.
At the 10-point mark, they have to do it again. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You might want to introduce that kind of.
That'd be a good thing. I also want to give them that choice and say, there's some more information here that you can gain from an insight check, but it is unclear how that information will affect your sanity.
That's right.
Because I want them to think, I'll do it, or no, I won't, or I'll get somebody else to read it. Yeah, that's sort of like,
nice.
that almost like, you read it, and I really like that element of choice.
Yes.
It's just like, and it's almost like you can survive without this information.
Right.
That's what I want to say to them. But if you gain this information, it's going to start, you'll have a better understanding of what's happening.
Right.
And I think
this kind of hard choice is really good. Don't accidentally paint yourself into a corner where they can't make progress unless they get this piece of information. Another way. So that's a well-known pitfall, right? So for investigative work, there always has to be another way, but that doesn't mean that there aren't extra interesting tidbits here and there. Sometimes you might call them side quests or extra bits, right?
100%. Yeah.
That's fine. That's really interesting. Putting hard choices before the players is what makes for good drama in a game.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
And for a horror game like this, that's really important. You want to get the players to feel the same kind of dread or uncertainty that their characters are meant to be experiencing in the game. That's what's going to make it a really fun experience for them when you're doing a horror game.
Yeah.
And so that goes back to our oldest and strongest emotion being fear, and fear as of the unknown being the king there. So this is that sense of the unknown, that sense that, oh, do I even dare open the closet door? Do I want to know what's on the other side?
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
That's where your money's going to come from. Yep. That'll be the good stuff.
Fantastic. And so we're currently playing Classic Fantasy and enjoying Classic Fantasy, and then we're going to be doing M Space because that's next in the thing. And then, or if I'm up to speed with the campaign, we might dabble in it after Classic Fantasy. We haven't decided yet. But I have to say, Matt, you've helped me in more ways than you probably know, because I don't know if you remember when and we were talking about animists and this idea of creating the spirits first. And that was such a wonderful piece of advice that was given to me. And then once I created my spirits, and who were allied to what and who were opposed to what, then the whole the whole area of spirits and animists just came to life. And you've done it again today as well, talking about the themes and the truths and, the entity. And it's, I think what I was focusing on the gameplay, if that makes sense. Right. And now I think what I'm going to do is take a step back and get those pillars or that foundation in place. If I can agree with myself what I want to do, because I'm not very good at this picking one entity or one evilness, but I'll try my best. Yeah.
The good part is your players aren't going to know.
Exactly.
You could change your mind after 3 sessions.
Yeah. That is true.
Okay.
Yeah. I just need not to publish it anyway.
Stay secret.
Yeah, state secret. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming along and sharing your words of wisdom again. I really do appreciate it. And
you're most welcome.
I think I think it's inspired me. I'm going to have to, as soon as I finish this call, go and write all these down before I go to bed, because otherwise my head's just going to be milling around with it. So huge thanks. Thank you for your expertise. And do you want to just say where people can find you and your products?
Oh, sure. Old Bones Publishing has a kiosk on Drive-Thru RPG. Yep. So that's the place to find our things, and you'll find adventures and game aids, all kinds of tidbits. Some of it costs money, some of it doesn't. Tips are always welcome.
Yes, always. Brilliant. And I think we've run one of your sessions.
You played Brockgradath sometime.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, that was a good one. I like that one. Yeah. That was the one with the shifting rooms, isn't it? Oh, I might have just put a huge spoiler out there.
You did, but maybe that will help me sell more copies.
So it is really, the players loved that game, that module. Good. It was excellent. So thank you so much. And look out for my horror campaign coming along. Thank you so much for coming along today.
Glad to. I will be looking for this campaign, so I better see it soon, man.
And that's it, another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Don't forget you can check out all my content by following my YouTube channel and the campaign areas of World Anvil. If you are a member of my YouTube channel, you will be able to see the members only videos relating to the creation of this new horror campaign. You can also become members of the orders on both my Patreon and Ko-fi page, where there are a number of perks for you to choose and engage with. Links in the show notes. I really appreciate your support, and do check out the Discord and Tapper Talk forums, where there are loads of really knowledgeable people sharing their ideas within the discussions. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, everyone, and I will chat to you all again in May. Until then, I hope all your opposed worlds succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.
Bell only took out one.
Well, actually, it was two, technically.
You extended the fire to two and just incinerated them, which is unbelievable.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so
what Burning Hands is supposed to do.
yes, you definitely relit your pilot light. Well done.